In the middle of the 14th century, the world did not end suddenly. It faded. It dimmed. It grew quiet, one village at a time, one street at a time, one breath at a time. There was no warning that could be understood. No clear beginning that people could recognize. Only small signs at first, a fever that did not fade, a cough that grew heavier, a swelling beneath the skin that felt warm, painful, and wrong. People did not know they were living through one of the most important moments in human history. They only knew that something invisible had arrived and that it did not leave. This is not a story meant to frighten. It is not told quickly. It is not told loudly. This is the true history of the Black Death, told slowly, as time itself once moved. If listening to long, uninterrupted history helps you relax, focus, or fall asleep, you may choose to like the video or subscribe. It quietly supports the continuation of these stories, told without urgency. Before the plague, life across Europe followed rhythms that had remained mostly unchanged for generations. Most people lived in small villages. Their days were shaped by sunrise and sunset, by planting and harvest, by church bells and seasonal weather. Cities were growing, but they were crowded and tightly built. Streets were narrow. Waste flowed openly through gutters. Fresh water was limited. Animals lived close to humans. Rats moved freely through homes, markets, and storage rooms without being noticed or feared. People did not understand germs. Illness was explained through religion, astrology, or imbalance within the body. A fever was not an infection. A cough was not contagious. Sickness was simply part of life. Trade connected continents. Spices from the East, silk from Asia, grain from fertile plains. Merchants traveled slowly but constantly, crossing deserts, mountains, and seas. Along with goods, something else traveled, something unseen, something silent. By the early 1300s, trade routes stretched from China to Europe. Caravans crossed Central Asia. Ships sailed across the Black Sea and Mediterranean. Rats lived aboard ships, feeding on stored grain. Fleas lived on rats. And within those fleas lived bacteria, dormant and unnoticed. The people moving along these routes felt no danger. Trade meant survival. Trade meant prosperity. No one suspected that the same paths feeding civilizations were also carrying death. In Central Asia, outbreaks had already begun. Villages experienced sudden sickness. Travelers spoke of entire communities disappearing. These stories were dismissed as exaggerations, as distant misfortune. Distance felt safe. It was not. In the year 1347, merchant ships arrived at the port of Messina in Sicily. They did not arrive as expected. Sailors were weak. Many were already dead. Those still alive were burning with fever, their bodies marked by dark swellings. Authorities ordered the ships away, but it was too late. The rats had already left the vessels. The fleas had already found new hosts. Within days, people in the city began to fall ill. The Black Death had entered Europe. At first, the disease appeared isolated. One household, one street, one neighborhood. Then, patterns emerged. Entire families died within a week. Neighbors vanished. Homes were left locked and silent. Symptoms appeared suddenly. Headaches, fever, chills. Then the swellings, painful, dark, growing beneath the skin. Death followed quickly. Doctors could do nothing. Priests moved from home to home, offering prayers to the dying. Graveyards filled faster than they could be expanded. The air felt heavy with fear. As the plague spread, fear began to shape behavior. Some people fled cities, believing distance could protect them. Others locked themselves inside their homes, refusing contact with anyone. Families abandoned sick relatives. Neighbors stopped helping neighbors. Markets fell silent. People searched for explanations. Many believed the plague was punishment from God. Others believed the air itself was poisoned. Astrologers blamed the alignment of planets. Doctors blamed imbalances in bodily humors. No explanation brought relief. Medicine in the 14th century relied on ancient text and tradition. Bloodletting was common. Herbal remedies were prescribed. Incense was burned to purify the air. Doctors wore long coats and masks shaped like beaks, filled with herbs meant to protect them from disease. These measures offered comfort, not protection. The true cause remained invisible, and so the plague continued. In cities like Florence, Paris, and London, death became constant. Church bells rang endlessly. Carts moved through streets collecting bodies. Mass graves were dug. Funeral rites were shortened or abandoned entirely. Writers of the time described a strange quiet settling over once busy streets. Work stopped. Schools closed. Life paused. The living moved slowly, carefully, as if sound itself might summon death. Living under constant threat changed people. Time lost meaning. Plans disappeared. Some turned deeply religious. Others abandoned morality entirely, believing the end was near. Feasts were held in defiance. Songs were sung in empty halls. Some chose joy over fear, if only briefly. Others simply waited. The plague did not spare the countryside. Villages were hit just as hard, sometimes harder. With fewer people, farms went untended. Crops rotted in fields. Livestock wandered unattended. Nature continued, indifferent to human suffering. Forests grew closer to abandoned settlements. Silence returned to places once filled with voices. By the time the first wave slowed, Europe had lost between 1/3 and 1/2 of its population. Millions were dead. Entire generations were erased. Family lines ended. Knowledge was lost. Yet humanity endured. Quietly, slowly. Those who survived the first great wave of the plague did not celebrate. Survival did not feel like victory. It felt like absence. Entire families were gone. Friends, neighbors, teachers, children, all vanished within months. The survivors walked through spaces that felt too large, too quiet, too empty. Houses stood abandoned, doors hanging open. Personal belongings remained untouched, as if their owners had only stepped away for a moment and never returned. People spoke less. They listened more. Every cough carried meaning, every fever brought fear. Survival came with a constant question that had no answer. Why did some live while others died? With so many dead, there were not enough hands to work the land. Fields lay empty, harvests failed, not from disease, but from absence. Landowners struggled to find workers. Survivors found themselves suddenly valuable. For the first time in centuries, peasants could demand wages. Serfs began to move freely. Old systems of control weakened. Kings and nobles tried to restore the old order through laws, but they could not reverse reality. The world had shifted, quietly, permanently. Faith had been central to medieval life. Churches were places of certainty, structure, and hope. But during the plague, even priests died in great numbers. Prayers did not stop the disease. Rituals did not offer protection. Some people lost faith entirely. Others clung to it more tightly than ever. New religious movements emerged. Flagellants walked from town to town, whipping themselves publicly, believing pain might appease God. Authorities eventually banned them, fearing disorder. Faith did not disappear. But it changed. Fear demanded targets. When understanding fails, suspicion grows. Minority communities were accused of causing the plague. False rumors spread of poisoned wells and deliberate infection. Violence followed. Entire communities were destroyed. These acts did nothing to stop the disease, but they left scars that would last for centuries. History remembers not only the plague itself, but how fear reshaped human behavior. The Black Death did not end after the first wave. It returned again and again. Every generation lived with the memory of sudden loss. Every outbreak reopened old wounds. Cities developed early forms of quarantine. Ships were isolated. Travelers were watched. The word quarantine itself comes from this era, meaning 40 days of isolation. Slowly, humans adapted. Art changed after the plague. Paintings became darker. Themes of death appeared everywhere. Skeletons danced with the living. Clocks reminded viewers of time's fragility. This was not obsession. It was acknowledgement. Life was no longer assumed. It was borrowed. Though doctors still misunderstood the plague, something new began. Observation. Records were kept. Patterns were noticed. Which cities suffered first? Which seasons were most dangerous? This slow accumulation of knowledge would one day lead to real understanding, though centuries would pass before bacteria were discovered. Progress was slow, but it had begun. In the Middle East, scholars carefully documented the plague. In Cairo, historians recorded death counts and social effects. In Asia, outbreaks followed trade routes just as they had in Europe. The Black Death was not a regional tragedy. It was global. Humanity shared this experience across borders, languages, and beliefs. After the waves passed, the world felt smaller, less crowded, more fragile. Forests reclaimed abandoned land. Wild animals moved closer to human settlements. Nature continued without pause. Humans learned humility, even if they did not name it as such. Centuries later, echoes of the Black Death remain. In public health, in medicine, in how societies respond to crisis. It reshaped economics. It reshaped religion. It reshaped how humans understand survival. The plague did not just kill. It transformed. Children who grew up after the first great wave of the Black Death entered a world shaped by absence. Many never knew their grandparents. Some never knew their parents. Orphan children were common. Extended families took them in when possible. In other cases, children grew up in monasteries, convents, or simply on the margins of society. Childhood became shorter. Responsibility arrived earlier. Those who survived learned quickly that life was uncertain and fragile. This understanding settled deep, becoming part of how generations thought, planned, and hoped. Women often found themselves taking on new roles. With husbands, fathers, and brothers gone, women managed farms, workshops, and businesses. Some guilds quietly allowed women to participate out of necessity. Widows inherited land and tools. This shift did not erase inequality, but it created small openings in rigid systems. Change did not arrive dramatically. It arrived slowly, quietly, out of need. Monasteries and convents were deeply affected. Many monks and nuns died while caring for the sick. Libraries fell quiet. Scriptoria, once filled with the scratching of quills, stood empty. Some knowledge was lost forever. Manuscripts were left unfinished. Thoughts were left unwritten. Yet in some places, survivors continued copying texts, preserving fragments of ancient knowledge that might otherwise have disappeared. As years passed, fear slowly transformed. It did not vanish. It settled. The plague became something remembered rather than experienced. Stories replaced screams. Warnings replaced panic. Parents told children what had happened. Communities marked mass graves. Anniversaries were remembered in silence. Memory became protection. Centuries after the Black Death, microscopes would reveal bacteria. Doctors would learn about transmission, immunity, and infection. But in the medieval world, this future was unimaginable. Progress was measured in small observations, careful notes, and quiet reflection. Still, those early records mattered. They became the foundation upon which modern medicine would one day stand. Before the plague, time felt circular. Seasons repeated. Life followed familiar patterns. After the plague, time felt fragile, urgent, finite. This shift influenced art, writing, and philosophy. People thought more about legacy, about memory, about meaning. Some cities never returned to their former size. Trade routes changed. Power shifted. Other cities adapted and grew stronger, learning from disaster. History does not move evenly. It bends, slows, and redirects. The Black Death was one of those moments of redirection. Survivors often carried lasting trauma, nightmares, anxiety, fear of illness. Though the language did not exist to describe it, the psychological toll was deep. People learned to live alongside uncertainty, to accept that safety was temporary. This understanding became part of human resilience. Folk songs emerged. Stories were told around fires. Some spoke of warning signs. Others spoke of miracles. These stories helped people process what they had lived through. They were not meant to be precise. They were meant to be remembered. Eventually, generations passed. The plague became history. But the world it created remained. Labor systems changed. Cities reorganized. Medicine slowly evolved. Humanity did not return to what it was before. It moved forward, carrying the memory quietly. Even after the great devastation of the 14th century, the plague never truly disappeared. It returned quietly, sometimes after decades of calm. People lived with a background awareness that death could reappear without warning. A sudden illness, a rumor from another city, a ship delayed at port. Fear no longer screamed. It whispered. Communities watched each other carefully. Illness was noticed faster. Isolation happened sooner. Experience had taught caution. Ports became places of control as well as trade. Ships were held offshore. Travelers were questioned. Goods were inspected. Isolation became policy rather than superstition. 40 days of waiting. Observation without contact. These measures were imperfect, but they slowed the spread. For the first time, societies attempted organized responses to disease. It was the beginning of public health. Special buildings were created to house the sick. Lazarettos stood apart from cities, surrounded by water or walls. Life inside them was quiet and heavy. Time moved slowly. Hope and despair existed side by side. Some recovered. Many did not. But separation saved others. Rulers learned that disease threatened stability as much as armies. Cities that managed outbreaks survived. Those that ignored them suffered deeply. Record-keeping improved. Population counts were tracked. Deaths were documented. Administration became more structured. The plague taught governments that caring for people was a form of power. Merchants adapted quickly. They altered routes. They avoided certain ports. Trade did not stop. It changed shape. Economic survival depended on flexibility. Those who learned this thrived in the New World. With cities dangerous, some people returned to rural life. Small communities formed far from trade routes. Isolation brought safety, but also loneliness. Life slowed further. Silence deepened. Nature surrounded these communities, indifferent and steady. Death no longer shocked. It became part of daily awareness. This familiarity did not harden people completely. It softened some. It humbled others. Many learned compassion through loss. Writers documented what they saw. They described empty streets. They recorded conversations with the dying. Their words survive today, offering quiet windows into the past. They did not know they were preserving history. They were simply trying to understand their world. In the Islamic world, scholars debated the meaning of disease. Some argued for contagion. Others focused on spiritual interpretation. Hospitals continued operating. Doctors observed symptoms carefully. These discussions influenced later medical thought. As decades passed, the sharpness of loss faded. Stories replaced experience. Memory replaced fear. Children grew up without seeing mass death. Life resumed its rhythm. But the knowledge remained beneath the surface. Cities began to change slowly. Wider streets. Better airflow. Public spaces expanded. These changes were not immediate. They happened gradually, over generations. The plague reshaped cities quietly. Those who survived outbreaks often showed resistance later. Though they did not know why, immunity existed. This silent protection shaped population recovery. Biology worked where knowledge could not. Historians often mark the Black Death as the end of the medieval era. Not because everything changed instantly, but because nothing was ever the same. The old world weakened. A new one began forming. Slowly, gradually. Population loss created opportunity. Wealth concentrated. Education expanded. Art flourished. Science advanced. Out of devastation came transformation. Not intentionally. Not quickly. But undeniably. Even today, echoes remain. In language. In policy. In instinctive responses to illness. Humanity remembers even when it forgets why. The Black Death was not just an event. It was a process, a long, slow reshaping of humanity. It reminds us that history is not always loud. Sometimes it moves silently, one breath at a time. Human memory does not hold events evenly. Some moments are preserved sharply, others fade into silence. The Black Death lived in memory in a particular way. It was not remembered as a single year or a single disaster, but as a long shadow that stretched across lifetimes. Grandparents spoke of it with pauses. Parents spoke of it with caution. Children listened without fully understanding. Memory softened the horror, but it never erased it. Words absorbed the experience. Phrases about death, illness, and fate entered common speech. Time itself was described differently. People spoke more often of before and after. Language adapted, as it always does, to contain what humans endure. To medieval people, the human body remained a mystery. They could see its failure. They could not see its cause. This mystery inspired fear, but also curiosity. Slowly, anatomy was studied more carefully. Autopsies, once forbidden, became more accepted. Understanding moved forward, step by step, in silence. In villages, local healers became vital. Midwives, herbalists, and caregivers worked quietly, without recognition. They observed patterns. They noticed which remedies soothed, even if they did not cure. Their knowledge passed orally from generation to generation. Much of it was never written down, but it mattered. The presence of constant death changed moral thinking. Some people became more generous. Others became more selfish. Charity increased in some places. Crime increased in others. Human nature did not change. It revealed itself. Days felt longer. Nights felt heavier. Without certainty, people lived closer to the present moment. Long-term plans felt fragile. This shift influenced how people valued time, relationships, and work. Life became something to be noticed, not assumed. Universities closed. Teachers died. Students dispersed. Learning paused, then resumed unevenly. When education returned, it carried new questions. About nature, about the body, about cause and effect. Curiosity survived loss. Even isolated communities were not fully protected. Eventually, trade or travel brought infection. The idea of true isolation proved fragile. Human connection, while essential, carried risk. This paradox remained unresolved. People noticed that outbreaks followed certain seasons. Warmth and moisture seemed connected to sickness. Though the reasoning was flawed, observation laid groundwork. Nature was no longer just background. It was active, influential. Communities judged their leaders by response. Those who acted decisively gained loyalty. Those who ignored danger lost credibility. Authority became tied to protection. This expectation would shape future governance. In some places, silence became customary. Fewer celebrations. More restraint. This was not despair. It was respect for fragility. Life continued quietly. Thinkers began questioning fate and control. Was everything predetermined? Could humans influence their future? These questions did not demand answers. They invited reflection. Philosophy deepened, not by certainty but by doubt. Eventually, markets reopened fully. Festivals returned. Music filled streets again. Normality did not erase memory. It rested on top of it. The past remained beneath the present. The Black Death was not a single chapter. It was a turning point. Humanity emerged, altered, more cautious, more observant. History moved forward, carrying this experience quietly. Fear does not disappear when events end. It travels quietly through generations. Children born long after the Black Death still grew up with habits shaped by it. Distance was respected. Illness was watched closely. Strangers were approached cautiously. These behaviors were not taught formally. They were absorbed silently through example. History lived inside routine. Daily life adapted around uncertainty. People washed more often, even without understanding why. Homes were aired. Waste was moved farther from living spaces. These changes were small. They were inconsistent, but they mattered. Human survival often advances through habit before knowledge. Grief did not arrive once. It arrived repeatedly. People mourned parents, then siblings, then neighbors. There was little time to recover between losses. Public mourning became restrained. Private sorrow deepened. Grief became something carried quietly rather than displayed. Survivors often spoke of what they no longer heard. Children playing, markets shouting, churches full. Silence itself became a reminder. Even when life returned, that silence lingered in memory. Some individuals dedicated themselves to recording events, not to seek fame, but to preserve understanding. They wrote names. They counted deaths. They noted dates and places. These records form the backbone of what we know today. Without them, much would be lost. Time felt uneven. Days of fear stretched endlessly. Months of calm passed unnoticed. This distortion shaped memory. People remembered emotion more than sequence. History, too, remembers this way. People became more aware of their physical sensations. A slight ache drew attention. A cough carried weight. The body became something to monitor closely. Awareness replaced ignorance. Though cures did not exist, care did. Food was shared. Water was brought. Hands were held. These acts did not stop death, but they softened it. Humanity survived not only through biology but through care. Older generations suffered greatly. Their loss meant the disappearance of memory, skill, and guidance. Communities rebuilt without elders to advise them. This absence shaped decisions for decades. Humans adapted without realizing they were doing so. They changed routes. They altered behaviors. They avoided patterns linked to danger. Adaptation does not always announce itself. It unfolds quietly. Music changed tone. Slower melodies emerged. Lyrics reflected fragility. Music became a place to release emotion without words. Sound carried what speech could not. Storytellers shaped collective memory. They did not focus only on death. They spoke of survival. Stories balanced fear with endurance. They reminded listeners that life continued. Across regions and cultures, experiences mirrored one another. Loss, fear, adaptation. Humanity was divided by geography, but united by experience. This shared suffering created unseen connections. As centuries passed, pain became abstract. Numbers replaced faces. Dates replaced names. Yet beneath abstraction, reality remained. History carries weight even when softened. The Black Death taught lessons without intention. It showed limits. It exposed vulnerability. It did not offer answers. It offered perspective. After everything, humanity continued. Not unchanged, not untouched, but alive. This continuation is its quiet triumph. When so many lives ended in such a short time, knowledge vanished with them. Craftsmen died without apprentices. Farmers died without passing on experience. Healers died with remedies known only to them. Some skills were forgotten completely. Others survived in fragments. Civilization did not collapse, but it thinned. What remained had to be rebuilt slowly, patiently. There was no guide for recovery. No instruction on how to restore a world that had lost so many. People rebuilt by repeating what worked and abandoning what did not. Trial replaced tradition. Observation replaced certainty. Mistakes were made quietly. Successes went unnoticed. Life moved forward without announcing itself. Children born decades after the first wave grew up surrounded by caution. They learned not through fear but through behavior. Hands were washed. Distance was respected. Illness was taken seriously. They did not know why these habits existed. They simply inherited them. History lived inside their routine. Before the plague, risk was largely accepted as fate. Afterward, risk became something to manage. People avoided crowds during sickness. They paid attention to patterns. They delayed travel. Risk became visible. This shift would shape decision-making for centuries. Awareness of mortality deepened. People spoke less of forever, more of now. This did not bring despair. It brought presence. Moments mattered more, because they could end. Trust had been broken by fear and blame. It returned slowly. Neighbors helped again. Markets reopened fully. Communities reconnected. Trust, once lost, required patience. It came back quietly. Some never returned to their original homes. They settled elsewhere, starting new lives. Migration reshaped regions. Languages mixed. Customs blended. The plague indirectly redrew human maps. True understanding of disease would not arrive for hundreds of years. Yet humans continued adapting without it. Survival did not require complete knowledge. It required responsiveness. This lesson remains true. Writers continued to reference the plague long after it passed. Sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. Themes of impermanence became common. Literature softened the memory, allowing reflection without panic. Survivors often expressed gratitude quietly, not in celebration, but in appreciation. A meal, a sunrise, a calm day. Small moments gained weight. Eventually, festivals returned fully. Music filled streets again. Laughter returned. Celebration did not erase memory. It coexisted with it. Joy returned carefully. The Black Death became one thread among many. Important, but not isolated. It joined wars, discoveries, and migrations in shaping humanity. History absorbed it. The plague did not teach through instruction. It taught through experience. It showed that systems must adapt, that knowledge must grow, that care matters. These lessons remain unspoken but present. From a distance of centuries, the Black Death appears as a turning point. From within it, it was simply life unfolding. History always feels different when lived than when remembered. Modern readers look back with knowledge unavailable to the past. Bacteria, transmission, treatment. Yet the emotional experience remains recognizable. Fear, loss, hope. These do not change. Human history is not a series of endings. It is a continuous movement. The Black Death did not end humanity. It redirected it. Quietly. If you pause now, the world remains calm. The story rests. Time continues its slow movement. History breathes. As centuries placed space between humanity and the Black Death, perspective slowly emerged. What once felt endless became measurable. What once felt personal became historical. Distance allowed reflection without fear. Patterns could be seen clearly. Consequences could be understood. History requires distance to speak softly. The Black Death revealed something fundamental about humanity. Not strength, not dominance, adaptability. Humans changed behavior, systems, and expectations in response to pressure. They did not defeat the plague. They endured it. Endurance proved more powerful than control. Each generation carried fragments of understanding forward. Some accurate, some flawed. Together, they formed a slow accumulation of wisdom. Progress did not arrive suddenly. It arrived layered. One observation at a time. Certainty dissolved during the plague. Human control proved limited. Arrogance faded. Humility replaced confidence. This humility shaped future inquiry. People began asking how rather than assuming why. Caution became a shared instinct. People paused before acting. They considered consequences. This instinct did not stifle life. It preserved it. Caution became a quiet ally. Modern public health traces its roots back to these centuries. Quarantine, observation, record-keeping. What began as survival became structure. The plague shaped systems that protect humanity today. The Black Death did not create fear or kindness. It revealed them. It showed how humans respond under pressure, how they choose care or isolation, how they navigate uncertainty. History acts as a mirror. Time did not slow for the plague. It did not stop for grief. It continued, steady and indifferent. Humanity adapted to time, not the other way around. Even centuries later, fragility remains. Systems can fail. Health can falter. The lesson is not fear. It is awareness. Fragility invites care. History allows remembering without reliving. It gives distance while preserving meaning. The Black Death no longer threatens us. But its lessons remain accessible, quietly waiting. Recovery did not happen in years. It happened in generations. Children grew. Cities expanded. Ideas matured. Healing followed time's rhythm. The Black Death occupies only a small portion of human history. Yet its influence stretches far beyond its years. It reshaped how humans think about life, death, and responsibility. It remains part of the story. Now the narrative rests again. Not ended. Not concluded. Simply paused. Time moves forward quietly. History does not follow us loudly. It walks beside us quietly. The Black Death remains present not as fear, but as background knowledge. It informs how societies think about illness, about responsibility, about care for one another. Most people never think of it directly. Yet its influence remains woven into daily life. Events do not exist alone. The plague altered labor. Labor altered wealth. Wealth altered education. Education altered curiosity. Curiosity altered science. One event rippled outward, touching centuries it would never see. Because people wrote during the plague, we remember. Because they counted, we understand scale. Because they described, we feel distance without forgetting. Record-keeping became an act of care for the future. Those writers did not know who would read their words. They wrote anyway. Survival is not dramatic. It is repetitive. Waking up, eating, working, sleeping. These small acts carried humanity forward when grand plans failed. Continuity was built from routine. There was no quick solution, no cure to discover, no enemy to defeat. Only waiting, watching, enduring. Patience became a necessity, not a virtue. People accepted what they could not change. They still tried to improve what they could. Acceptance did not mean surrender. It meant realism. This balance shaped resilience. Hope returned not as excitement, but as steadiness. Days passed without illness. Weeks followed. Hope arrived gently, without celebration. It stayed because it did not demand attention. Eventually, children were born who had never seen outbreak or quarantine. For them, the world felt stable. They played in streets once empty. They learned trades from adults who survived. They lived inside recovery without knowing it. Personal memory faded. Written memory remained. Stories became chapters. Experiences became timelines. History replaced trauma. This transition allowed societies to move forward. Cities that survived carried marks of adaptation. Hospitals expanded. Public spaces changed. Infrastructure quietly incorporated lessons learned from suffering. Walls were rebuilt not only for defense, but for health. History is mostly quiet. Moments like the Black Death stand out because silence surrounds them. Life is made of long stretches without catastrophe. These stretches matter. Later generations would face other pandemics. They would look back, knowingly or not, to medieval responses. Each crisis carried echoes of the past. Humanity learns in layers. The idea that disease could be prevented, not just endured, slowly formed. Prevention became a goal rather than a hope. This shift changed medicine forever. The Black Death does not dominate history. It sits within it. A moment of rupture. A lesson of fragility. Life continued before it. Life continued after it. Once more, the narrative pauses. Not because it has ended, but because time itself moves slowly. History waits patiently. Loss does not disappear. Even when bodies are buried and cities rebuild, the shadow of absence lingers. People walked through streets knowing who had vanished. Families ate meals with empty chairs. Workplaces felt quieter, as if silence itself carried memory. This shadow was subtle. It was constant. It shaped thoughts, actions, and decisions for decades. Despite immense suffering, humanity endured. Children grew, adults worked, markets reopened, and communities slowly reformed. Resilience is not a sudden act of heroism. It is small, repeated decisions. The decision to wake. The decision to care for another. The decision to continue. The Black Death tested this resilience endlessly. News traveled slowly. Merchants, pilgrims, and travelers carried both goods and reports. Stories of illness spread faster than understanding. Rumors mingled with fact. Fear followed both. Communication itself became a tool for survival. Humans learned which messages to heed, which to question. Faith offered comfort, but not answers. Churches filled, prayers were offered, rituals performed. Some found solace, others found despair. Religious institutions were challenged to respond practically, spiritually, and morally. The Black Death reshaped faith, not by destroying it, but by testing it. Labor shortages shifted power. Workers could demand better conditions. Landowners adjusted to scarcity. Markets evolved. Trade adapted. Economies slowly rebalanced. Disaster became an unexpected driver of structural change. Cities suffered first and hardest, but villages were not spared. Isolation slowed the spread in some rural areas, but it did not prevent eventual outbreaks. Life there remained hard, quiet, and dangerous. Fewer people meant changes in social organization. Smaller communities sometimes adapted more effectively than large ones. Life continued differently. After each wave, silence settled. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of certainty. People spoke less. Neighbors watched one another more closely. Daily routines carried a quiet tension. This tension faded slowly over decades, leaving memory behind. Physicians began to keep careful notes. They recorded symptoms, deaths, and patterns of spread. Though their understanding of disease was incomplete, observation became systematic. This small foundation would later support advances in science and medicine. Art reflected life. Paintings depicted death, decay, and the fragility of humanity. Skeletons appeared in dance. Timepieces reminded viewers of mortality. Even mundane objects gained symbolic weight. Art became a way to process fear without being consumed by it. Stories circulated in homes, marketplaces, and around fires. Songs memorialized loss. Legends offered cautionary lessons. Storytelling became both preservation and therapy. It helped communities process shared trauma. Many survived, quietly, unnoticed. They rebuilt lives without recognition. Their endurance shaped future generations. Daily acts of survival became history in motion. Though the focus is often Europe, the Black Death spread across continents. Asia, North Africa, and the Middle East experienced similar waves of devastation. Global connections via trade meant humanity shared this trial. Experience crossed borders, even when understanding did not. Centuries would pass before medicine could identify bacteria, vectors, and contagion. Until then, humanity relied on observation, trial, and careful practice. Knowledge accumulated slowly, often quietly and imperfectly. Adaptation continued, unseen and uncelebrated. The Black Death required waiting, watching, enduring. This slow rhythm taught humans patience. Not heroic, not dramatic, just persistence. Survival itself became an art. Time changed after the plague. Life seemed shorter, more urgent. Moments became precious. This subtle shift altered culture, work, and human relationships. Communities rebuilt in ways they might not have otherwise. Churches were rebuilt. Homes were redesigned. Markets reorganized. Small changes reflected lessons learned from absence and loss. Children born after the first waves of the plague grew up in a world scarred by absence. They never saw the horrors firsthand, but they felt the caution, the silence, and the stories passed down. Loss became abstract yet real. They learned to value life not in years, but in moments. Friendships, meals, simple walks, each carried weight because everything could end unexpectedly. Memory survived in gestures, in habits, in quiet reminders. Women assumed new responsibilities. With fathers, husbands, and brothers gone, they maintained farms, businesses, and households. They passed knowledge to the next generation, often orally, quietly shaping culture. Children learned resilience not from lectures, but by watching survival in action. Family structures shifted subtly, enduring beyond the immediate crisis. Communities learned from what was not said. Quiet streets, empty fields, and abandoned houses all carried lessons. Silence taught vigilance. It taught observation. It taught the cost of ignorance. Those who listened learned more than those who only spoke. Faith faced both strain and adaptation. Churches struggled to serve communities while priests and monks fell ill. Some turned away from faith entirely. Others embraced it more deeply, seeking meaning in suffering. New movements arose, challenging established beliefs. Faith remained, but it was transformed, tempered by reality. With labor scarce, peasants and workers gained new leverage. Wages rose. Mobility increased. Traditional hierarchies weakened. Trade continued, but systems shifted subtly. Economic adaptation became a slow, continuous process, shaped by necessity rather than choice. Cities were forever altered. Streets widened, sanitation improved, and public spaces redesigned. Markets, churches, and homes reflected lessons learned from loss and survival. Architecture itself became a quiet record of resilience. People became more aware of their own health. Coughs, fevers, aches, all were monitored. Observation replaced ignorance. Care replaced indifference. The body became both fragile and central to human understanding. Though medicine could not stop the plague, care persisted. Families brought food. Neighbors tended to each other. Healing became an act of presence, of attention, of humanity. Survival depended as much on care as it did on chance. Art reflected both fear and endurance. Paintings depicted death, mortality, and fleeting life. Skeletons danced with the living. Timepieces reminded viewers of the fragility of existence. Art became a language for processing what words could not. Storytellers carried memory forward. Songs, tales, and legends memorialized suffering while offering lessons. These narratives balanced caution with hope. They ensured that even when memory faded, experience endured. The Black Death was not solely European. It traveled across Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa. Trade connected continents. Disease did too. Humanity shared this trial collectively, even when understanding remained local and fragmented. Observation, record-keeping, and adaptation accumulated gradually. Generations learned without textbooks or formal instruction. Lessons were embedded in routines, habits, and institutions. Modern medicine owes its roots to these quiet, incremental steps. Survival required waiting, observation, endurance. There were no quick fixes, only the slow unfolding of time and care. Patience became essential. Endurance became routine. Life moved forward, one careful day at a time. Even after decades, the emotional echoes of the Black Death lingered. Survivors carried unspoken anxiety. Communities absorbed collective caution. Generations learned to notice small signs of danger and adjust behavior. This was not always conscious. It was embedded in routines, habits, and unspoken rules. Fear became subtle. Survival became instinct. Schools were disrupted for generations. Teachers died. Knowledge was lost. When education resumed, curricula reflected new priorities. Health, hygiene, and observation became more valued. Learning adapted to a fragile world. Children learned not only what was written but what was lived. Labor shortages forced innovation. Workers became more valuable. Tasks once assigned to serfs were delegated differently. Mechanical and organizational adaptation began, quietly reshaping the economy. The plague indirectly shifted social structures, providing unexpected freedom to some and challenges to others. With so many men lost, women took on roles traditionally denied to them. They managed farms, shops, and estates. They educated children, oversaw finances, and sustained communities. Though society would later attempt to reassert old hierarchies, these changes could not be entirely undone. Women had demonstrated capability, and the memory endured. Faith adapted to loss. Priests and monks who survived the waves worked to restore communities spiritually and materially. Some found solace in ritual. Others sought reform. New religious movements emerged, reflecting both devotion and desperation. The church itself was tested and transformed. Pain became reflected in culture. Paintings, poetry, and music incorporated themes of mortality, impermanence, and resilience. The motif of death, dancing among the living, became common. Stories balanced despair with hope. Cultural expression allowed processing of trauma on a communal level. Cities bore the scars of loss. Empty streets, abandoned homes, and shuttered markets were visible reminders of mortality. Even as cities recovered, their layouts subtly reflected lessons learned. Sanitation, airflow, and building design were slowly adapted. Architecture became history in stone and timber. People became increasingly attentive to their own bodies. A slight cough or fever no longer passed unnoticed. Observation replaced ignorance. The body became both fragile and a source of knowledge. Understanding unfolded slowly through experience. Caring for the sick continued despite the lack of cures. Families fed and tended to the ill. Neighbors assisted quietly. This care did not prevent death, but it preserved humanity. Survival relied as much on community as on luck. The plague followed trade routes. It traveled from port to port, continent to continent. The Black Death affected humanity in multiple regions simultaneously. Shared experience, though interpreted differently, created subtle global connections. Observation, adaptation, and survival were universal. Record-keeping preserved events. Deaths, dates, and patterns were written down. These records became history, allowing future generations to understand events that survivors could only feel. Writing became both shield and mirror, capturing fragility and endurance. Daily survival was quiet, repetitive, uncelebrated. Waking, eating, working, sleeping. Endurance unfolded slowly. Life continued one measured day at a time. Time itself felt altered. Days stretched during fear. Weeks slipped by unnoticed in calm. Perception changed. Life was measured not in years but in moments of safety and recovery. Markets reopened fully. Festivals returned. Children played in streets once empty. Normality coexisted with memory. Life had returned, but the lessons remained beneath it. The Black Death reshaped labor, social structure, religion, art, medicine, and perception. It left humanity altered in ways subtle, enduring, and often unrecognized. Fragility became understood. Patience became routine. Observation became instinct. The Black Death was not a singular event. Later waves returned in cycles, centuries after the first devastation. Though less deadly each time, they reminded humanity of vulnerability. Every new outbreak revived habits, washing hands, isolating the sick, avoiding crowded streets. Generations born after the first wave still lived with the knowledge of fragility embedded in daily life. By now, fear had transformed into instinct. Children learned caution without explicit instruction. Even decades later, communities reacted with preparedness and care. This quiet, inherited memory shaped social structures, healthcare practices, and personal behavior for centuries. Art, literature, and music preserved both grief and hope. Stories of survival, sacrifice, and endurance became cultural touchstones. The plague's impact shaped morality, ethics, and collective empathy. People understood loss in ways that were never fully written but deeply felt. Observation, record-keeping, and experience slowly built the foundation for future medicine. Quarantine, public health measures, and documentation became permanent practices. While science would take centuries to fully understand disease, the medieval experience created a roadmap for later generations. Life rebuilt itself gradually. Cities, villages, and communities adapted. Economies rebalanced. Institutions reformed. The world that emerged was altered yet familiar. Loss reshaped priorities, teaching humanity to value resilience, adaptability, and patience. The plague revealed the duality of humanity. Fear and compassion existed side by side. Selfishness and generosity coexisted. Destruction and creativity emerged simultaneously. History is neither purely dark nor purely bright. It is a mix of all human potential. Centuries later, the memory of the Black Death remains quiet. It exists in archives and literature and cultural rituals. Yet the experience is also in subtle habits. A careful touch, a mindful gesture, a respect for health. A whisper of the past woven into modern life. The Black Death reminds humanity that life is fragile, that survival requires patience, observation, and care, that resilience is built through repetition, not drama. Even in loss, there is growth. Even in fear, there is learning. History teaches without shouting. It teaches through quiet reflection. The Black Death changed the course of humanity. It altered labor, social structure, medicine, culture, and consciousness. Yet life endured. Generations adapted. Society rebuilt, stronger and more aware of its own fragility. History moves forward, carrying lessons silently. Humanity continues, shaped but not defeated, fragile yet enduring, forever remembering without reliving. And so, as the centuries have passed, the Black Death remains both distant and near. A shadow of memory, a teacher of caution, a reminder of resilience. From fear and silence, life continued. From loss and grief, humanity persisted. From devastation, civilization rebuilt itself slowly, carefully, and quietly. This is the story of survival, adaptation, and the enduring human spirit.